What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be breaking down the ban restriction announcement that we got yesterday as of recording this video, and going over some of the major headlines and potential shakeups that the format has experienced now that we have some changes that are pretty, I would say format warping, not in the case of there's going to be a deck now that just kind of goes to the top and is going to kind of dominate, kind of like how the modern scam deck has, but definitely is a big shakeup to the formats and will definitely see tons of changes towards the top of the metagame and probably even throughout the metagame with these changes. So, of course, before we get too deep into it and we get into the article, if you love a modern and pioneer content, please be sure to subscribe and ring a notification bell. That's mainly what we do on this channel is talk about the formats and try to help best prepare you to tackle them as well, either at your RCQ or at your local events. So if that's something that interests you, please consider subscribing, ringing the notification bell. Need to work on my enunciation there. And then in the description of this video, I'm going to have the link to this article if you want to read it yourself, or there's a link in the description for the Discord server as well that I run. So if you want to join that, go ahead and follow the link down there and join. So the BNR that we got yesterday had some pretty big changes. We're going to start with Pioneer just because that's the first section in this article that they have here. So, few big things. Karn the Great Creator, we knew this card was like dominating with the help, like with green decks mainly. You know, some other decks could utilize Karn, but the fact that Mono Green Devotion just got to make obscene amounts of mana, of course, had ways to cheat Karn into play and things like that. And then all the Silver Bullets had access to, plus access to an infinite combo, just was a pretty free inclusion for the deck that kind of already wanted to play it to begin with, and basically just meant that it got to kind of extend into these trees, decision trees, to end up comboing and winning the game. So that card is now gone. Geological Appraiser is the new card from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan set, where you would play this and then you would just clone it a bunch of times and had a bunch of different well, not even really a bunch of decisions. Just like if you resolve this card, you won the game. You know, if you were able to just kind of go through your chain unimpeded, you were going to win the game on the spot, and you could do it as early as turn 3. While there is technically another turn 3 combo deck that exists in the format, it's a little bit easier to disrupt than the Geological Appraiser decks that we've seen coming from the Pioneer format. So, kind of happy to see this gone. That sort of combo just doesn't have a place in the format. And then probably the Bane headliner. I mean, we kind of expected those two cards to get banned. We expected those kinds of changes to come. I know, especially for me, I thought there was going to be even more to try to help with the Rakdos variants in the format. But we got Smuggler's Copter back, which was banned pretty early on in the format's existence. We had Mono Black Aggro was like the top deck in the format. I remember winning the SCG Invitational, and then from there, like I played this at like locals and just that never really. I mean, like Smuggler's Copter was like very good, but like Mono Black, even at the time that the format was, kind of shaping in, and we were kind of figuring out what's good, what's not good, and when they were doing kind of like weekly ban announcements and whatnot, Mono Black was like a top tier deck, and Smuggler's Copter definitely gave it a lot of life in the deck, and I think it was still pretty good even after Smuggler's Copter was banned, but it was definitely noticeably weaker going forward. So, in the article, we want to provide as diverse of an experience as possible. It is a place where you can have fun using cards from the past standard environments without content being printed directly into or having content naturally rotate out of it, which is kind of what we had with Modern until Pioneer kind of came about. Now Modern's kind of printing their own straight to modern sets, which is pretty cool that we do have a format that is pretty much like a standard set gets printed and then it is automatically in the format without there being like a Pioneer Masters or a Pioneer Horizons type set, which is pretty cool. It is our largest format that gets its content solely through the standard pipeline. As a large format, generally only the most powerful or synergistic of cards printed through standard will find their home here. And since it's a format full of powerful cards, proper caretaking is required to ensure it stays as fun as possible, which if you heard from like a lot of people, Pioneer hasn't really been that fun given, the essentially lack of movement between like the top decks and them just kind of shifting their positions and not even really being challenged for their spot. The last time we took action in the format was June of 2022, about 1.5 years ago. The plan is to return to a more active role in managing Pioneer. During the year after its creation, changes to Pioneer were frequent, sometimes with multiple changes in a single month. Moving forward, we will be actively using our main set release banned and restricted announcements cadence to take better care of Pioneer. So essentially meaning that there's going to be more, it seems like more bannings and stuff, or at least a more willingness to look at the format objectively and see if there's anything like too powerful. So could also attribute to maybe the lack of changes is just to make some changes now to some decks that were problematic, and then moving forward, we might see a change, every 3 to 6 months in the format rather than a year and a half since the last time they took action with the format as well. I don't quite remember what they even banned in like June of 2022. It's been that long. Um, Even though the metagame share and win rate of mono green Nykthos decks have been within a reasonable range, the deck has simply been a large component of the Pioneer metagame for most of the format's lifetime. Pretty accurately, like the whole time, like mono green. Devotion has kind of been a mainstay of like the Pioneer metagame. It is only within like the last, I want to say like year or two maybe, that we've had like this Karn the Great Creator like crazy sideboard package. So they go on to say, with Karn the Great Creator capable of finding threats and solutions to whatever the deck encounters, it can be quite difficult to go over the top of the strategy. This causes the metagame to either try to go underneath of it or try to ignore what it's doing with its own combo strategy, effectively bending the metagame due to its existence. The consistency and strength of the decks also makes it very difficult for various types of fair mid-range strategies to exist. Notably, Rakdos mid-range being the most popular one, and of course, it specifically just is very broad on mid-range strategies. Now, Rakdos mid-range is one that it is definitely leans more towards being aggressive, and like all of its cards just kind of play both sides very good. So I mean, mono green, I would say, is reasonably favored against like Rakdos, but Rakdos isn't a huge dog where a lot of the other mid-range decks would be at a pretty big disadvantage going into mono green. So, and of course, we've seen some very aggressive decks. I mean, we see Boros Convoke put 14 power into play on turn two, mono white just being able to put tons of power into play and then essentially make them all unblockable in attack. So then we see some very, very, very aggressive decks in the format, or decks that specifically aim to get rid of it in some way. So definitely a good thing to kind of nerf the Nykthos decks, even if they are, relatively fair in terms of like metagame share. Karn's range is so broad, it can facilitate convoluted infinite combos that make the format less approachable at little to no opportunity cost. Additionally, Karn's ability to naturally suppress artifacts is likely keeping a spread of interesting cards from being played. While it has recently been on the decline in terms of its metagame share, it's clear the deck has a warping effect on the metagame for too long, and for these reasons, Karn the Great Creator is banned. Great banning. The introduction of the Lost Caverns of Ixalan brought some new toys to the format. The Discover mechanic featured on cards such as Geological Appraiser, Trumpeting Carnosaur, and Quintorius Khan have been given rise to the brand new strategies that don't play any other cards naturally, costing 4 or less aside from cloning effects. When left undisturbed, these decks can either produce enough creatures to win via combat or enough Quintorius triggers to deal lethal to the opponent directly. Being able to win the game on the spot on turn 3 with Geological Appraiser after creating a single treasure token is a bit too much pressure for folks to be a good thing for long-term health of the format. While it's not clear that it is the strongest thing to be doing in Pioneer, without some form of interaction, players can lose the game as early as their own second turn. This doesn't meet our long-term vision for the format, where players can enjoy a variety of macro strategies before losing games so early. If every deck must run 1 or 2 mana interaction spells, the format shrinks. For these reasons, Geological Appraiser is banned. Notably, Quintorius Khan you can still play, although I think the building restrictions and stuff around that deck is obviously a little bit higher than Geological Appraiser. But that said, there is still a Discover combo deck with the Quintorius Khan version that gets to play just maybe a hair more interaction than what the Geological Appraiser decks were playing. But definitely a good ban nonetheless. The deck is pretty broken, and after getting to play with it a few times, it's pretty gross. We'll keep an eye on Quintorius decks and Pioneer. They can win as early as turn 4 as resolving slowly its namesake card, but the extra turn allows players to set up their own game plan and prepare for a pivotal turn more successfully. Definitely being able to pressure. I mean, people are still going to play these super aggressive decks. definitely if this combo deck, the Kentorius Khan combo deck, kind of stays around. But that deck has some interactions for those decks, and of course, like Rakdos midrange is pretty good, I would say, against some of the combo decks for its aforementioned, speed that it can take in those turns. Plus, having access to Thoughtseize is really good for it as well. Smuggler's Copter, banned back in December of 2019. Since then, many new sets have entered the format, and such the format has naturally grown in power over time. While unbanning is not something we do very often, I believe the format can absorb it successfully. Reintroducing it will create a new deck building puzzle or revive old ones and provide additional diversity. Smuggler's Copter is unbanned. With the actions we're taking today, the impacts caused by recent sets, Pioneer is going to be going through a good amount of change, and we're excited to see how the format adapts. And we'll be monitoring both data and your sentiment to continue pushing the format forward to keep toward the most fun place it can be. Let's actually finish the sentence, Dakota. So overall, some good changes to Pioneer. Obviously, Mono Green is very powerful. It has an inclusion of an infinite combo at a very low opportunity cost, as they stated in the article. And Geological Appraiser decks were probably just a hair too fast for the format, especially when people are putting 14 power into play on turn 2, and then like they're dying because they don't also play interaction. So here we're kind of giving some decks that don't necessarily play like interaction a little bit, I guess kind of like knocking down specifically that archetype a little bit more for the fact that Geological Appraiser is now gone and is probably one of the fastest combo decks. I mentioned earlier that there is like another turn 3 combo deck in the Amelia Explore combo where if you just gain life and you have Amelia and a Wild Growth Walker in play, you can get up to 20 power, you destroy all the creatures, effectively stopping your infinite loop, and then attacking for 20 and more than likely killing your opponent. I think that deck is just a hair bit easier to interact with because at least in like these appraiser decks, you cast your thing, that's basically it, and they have so many different ways of going into it where, the Amelia combo deck, you need like 3 pieces on board. Granted, they all kind of fit on curve with each other where even on turn 3 you could like Thoughtseize, take your opponent's like removal spell or whatnot, but then they can just cast a removal spell then too. So like it's kind of a mixed bag. I'm sure they're probably keeping an eye on that combo deck as well for the potential of getting to win games like on the spot. But I think a creature combo deck that needs 2 pieces to go off, but really like 3, maybe even 4 pieces to kind of just make sure that it's insulated well enough from a single removal spell, I think might be okay for the format going forward given the changes in that. Smuggler's Copter coming back, awesome. I love Smuggler's Copter. I have a love for Smuggler's Copter, and obviously being Mono Black being the first aggro deck, and this is the first deck that I really like built, and I was like, I'm gonna grind out the Pioneer format with. Obviously, before COVID happened, it was a lot of fun playing it, and then of course from there, like I switched to another broken deck that obviously people don't really want to talk about in the Lotus Field deck. So overall, good changes for the Pioneer format. I expect the top deck. I expect Rakdos to still be pretty good. People are still going to be playing Phoenix, so I don't think the top really changes that much. But I think the bottom, we start seeing some other mid-range strategies that may or may not be able to go over the top of like Rakdos and at least kind of like fight for that spot. So maybe in the coming weeks, we'll see some more mid-range decks. We'll see some other aggro decks that are integrating Smuggler's Copter into their strategies, while also having some other ones. I'm at least probably going to try Mono Black aggro again when getting our hands on Smuggler's Copter, just because I think that archetype was, very powerful with it. It might not be so good now, but at least, a very reasonable deck to be playing in the format for sure. So that wraps up Pioneer. Modern is a little bit more cut and dry, and in a way, like I'm kind of underwhelmed by the modern changes, but I think it's definitely a good place to start. Without reading the article going into this, I'm going to assume that they're kind of be taking the same liberties with the Pioneer format that they will with the modern format, at least in the hope. So for modern, Fury and Up the Beanstalk are banned. Now, people expected Grief to get banned, and at the end of all this, after we read the article, we'll kind of go into it and whatnot. So when we last spoke about Modern in August, we were most concerned about the new cards from Lord of the Rings Tales of the Middle-earth, namely Orcish Bowmaster and the One Ring. While these cards are powerful players in the metagame, another card has continued to suppress what what's possible in the format even more. Fury, most often played as a 4/4 double striker that clears the opponent's board, makes playing the creature decks nearly impossible, and they get 4/4 from the scam deck specifically in getting to evoke it, and then you bring it back. And even a deck like Yawgmoth, who has like these undying threats that in theory should kind of blank a removal spell, and need a second one. This kind of just got to get rid of their entire board for the most part, and really a lot of other decks as well. Rakdos Evoke has only risen in metagame share since the Modern Pro Tour this summer, I believe going from like 10% upwards of like 20, I think at one point like 23 or 24% at its highest, but then coming back down to a modest 21%. And coming in right behind is 4-color Omnath, also featuring Fury. Played in a smattering of other decks as well, Fury is keeping several diverse and interesting strategies at bay. For this reason, Fury is banned in Modern. Namely, some other decks that they missed too. Rhinos, I believe, is like now risen to like second or third in the format. You'd see like the 4-color Beanstalk decks playing Fury, albeit as like some upside of getting to destroy creatures, but then also getting to kind of draw cards from it as well and get into some interesting lines of play through that deck. Of course, like there's just a ton of red decks that like wanted to play Fury. I think someone said Fury was like in 50% of all modern deck lists or something like that, It's crazy. Absolutely nuts. Removing Fury will impact both the play rate and win rate of Rakdos Evoke. Players are currently using 4 or more copies of Undying effects like Not Dead After All to rebuy Grief or Fury. Without Fury, the opportunity cost of playing so many Undying effects increases, reducing consistency in the deck and becoming a real cost to include. It is possible these decks begin to transform into white versions that utilize Solitude and or Ephemery. However, a rebought Solitude is not as threatening as a 4/4 double strike and provides the deck with less coverage against the metagame. And of course, with Lightning Bolt kind of seeing a uptick in play, mainly because of like those Grief cards where it gets up to 3 toughness. Solitude will also only be up to 3 toughness. So people playing, 3 to 4 Lightning Bolt in their deck are still going to be able to deal with the threat, whereas when they were playing Fury, your Bolt did virtually nothing unless you paired it with another one or like a Bowmaster, Ren 6, so on. We believe the removal of Fury will widen the format, allowing players to explore additional strategies, especially with low toughness creatures. Finally, fewer overall Rakdos Evoke decks in the metagame will also likely reduce the total number of Grief and Orcish Bowmaster players will encounter. I don't know if I necessarily believe this. I think Fury getting banned does not inherently make the Rakdos Evoke deck worse. I think it just creates less games where you are likely to be scammed on turn one, obviously by getting rid of the 4 copies of a card. And I think if they went into white versions, where if they played like white black or something like that, would end up being where it goes. But some of the red cards are very powerful, where they get to play like Ragavan and like the various removal spells. Of course, they have removal with essentially getting to replace Fury with Solitude. Fury, obviously, like the power that they stated of it in like the beginning was the fact that you could just clear an opponent's board. Where even getting like 2 creatures with Solitude is probably going to be pretty good in a lot of cases, especially against like Rhinos, where you essentially keep a 4/3 around that is going to get rid of 2 Rhinos and then the potential to get rid of a third one, leaving one behind. But it's definitely not as threatening as they said than a 4/4 double striker, and definitely not as threatening to clear someone's entire board. With just that upside of getting to hit more than 2 creatures, where Solitude only has that ceiling of getting 2 of your opponent's creatures. We believe that the removal of Fury will widen the format, allowing players to explore additional strategies, including low toughness creatures. I've already read that, and I'm just now remembering it. So, Up the Beanstalk is one of Modern's newest inclusions, subsidizing many cards in the format that cost 5 or more mana. However, it is rare for a player to pay anywhere close to the 5 mana to cast the cards they are using with Up the Beanstalk, which, of course, the intention of Up the Beanstalk is that you're essentially adding draw card to all of your 5 mana spells, making them just a little bit better, rather than just being able to cast, Furies and Solitudes for free, casting the Leyline Bindings and stuff for 1 mana, and so on. While removing Fury from the format will certainly impact the usage of Up the Beanstalk, we don't believe that to be enough. It is remarkably difficult to interact with the 2 mana enchantment profitably, and the card replaces itself immediately. With players often playing a free spell on the same turn, since they get such a great return on the deal, and it is particularly telling when players have concluded that cascading into Up the Beanstalk is more advantageous than the zero mana options like Crashing Footfalls and Living End. For this reason, Up the Beanstalk is banned in Modern, which I think is a pretty good take nonetheless. The fact that like this card probably just shouldn't exist anyway, and at least in a format like Modern, where we are getting increasingly more expensive cards that you can cast for free, and the fact that arguably one of the best decks to be playing in the format is cascading into a card that ends up drawing more cards rather than one that will actually end the game. So pretty interesting overall. While I think Fury is specifically in the scam deck definitely is more of a feel bad that that got banned over Grief, in particular for the fact that we know that Fury isn't going to rip cards out of your hand, and kind of likely you are able to deal with a Fury with some of the extra cards, or you can just play a creature and you could just like chump block it and stuff, and hopefully kind of from there, which is a really bad thing to say, like hopefully you'll be able to answer it, but it feels like more of a better chance, I guess, than something like Grief. That said, in the widespread of the format, I think Fury is probably the better of the two. While it is kind of annoying to play against Grief in some of the other like combo based decks, kind of like the Living End decks, where they just kind of get a free Thoughtseize and then they get to see the coast is clear before they end up going for their combo. And of course, like the scam decks, just being able to take your two best cards, leave you with essentially nothing, and just kind of hoping that you draw very well. And even if you do, with the added pressure of the other cards that are in the deck, I think getting Rakdos into a more fair mid-range deck and actually being able to having to interact with the format in a way that isn't just tear cards out of your opponent's hand and then force them to play kind of with a busted hand, essentially like a play on a mold of 5 against a deck that just put 4 power into play on turn 1, and then on turn 2 just got to just bash them with Ragavan and hurt them with Dauthi Voidwalker, messing with like a graveyard, stuff like that. So overall, I think the modern metagame changes are very healthy. I think they're going to be very good for the format. While I don't think necessarily low toughness creature decks are going to now be super crazy, uh, it, I could definitely see more of a potential for it, specifically in the fact that now you have like Fury and Orcish Bowmaster, and of course you have Yawgmoth, but they all, have more of a cost. Like Ren 6, you're only able to do once per turn. The uh, Orcish Bowmaster is going to be able to do it when it enters the battlefield, and if you're a deck that draws extra cards, then that could be like an extra feel bad there. And of course, Yawgmoth, you have to invest in like sacrificing creatures, and if you even get to a point where you are able to set up kind of like the loop for the Yawgmoth deck where you can just put minus counters on like a bunch of things, you're going to end up being able to clear the whole board anyway, where I don't think any low toughness decks are going to be necessarily super. I mean, they're going to be upset about it, but like they're not going to be upset about where it's like, Fury doing it versus, Yawgmoth. You're actively losing life. You're making it a little bit easier for the creature deck to end up killing you if you're not able to actually win like that turn. So overall, great changes, both formats. Obviously the headlines are different with Pioneer getting back Smuggler's Copter after some pretty obvious cards getting the hammer, while Modern deciding to go with Fury as the card that dies for the sins of the format rather than Grief, definitely aiming to go wider with this than specifically at certain decks. Of course, in my opinion, I think the Rakdos scam decks are still okay for the most part. I think Grief is a card that probably should also be one that exits the format, given the plethora of options that you have when getting that kind of discard effect for essentially free in a lot of cases, because then usually if you're Living End, you followed up with like bringing everything back and then you essentially scammed it in play, or you're scam and you've done it on the first turn before your opponent can really even interact with it. In the best case, you like 3 for 2 them, and chances are you probably have enough low to the ground stuff in like Ragavan, Dauthi Voidwalker, Orcish Bowmaster, so on, that you're probably going to be able to win the game regardless if your Grief survives or not. And of course, Up the Beanstalk is just that deck was so dumb to play, so dumb to look at. I'm glad that it's gone. So yeah, that is the kind of breakdown, explanation, etc., of the BNR that we got yesterday. Overall, again, for like the millionth time, and I'm at least like aware of the fact. I think I just like to ramble for the sake of rambling. But overall, I'm very happy with the changes. A little underwhelmed because I thought we were going to go a little bit deeper. But I'm happy to see the unbanning of Smuggler's Copter. I'm happy to see some changes to the format going forward, and not just unbanning cards for the sake of unbanning cards. Of course, if you want to see cards that I think could potentially be unbanned, at least for the modern metagame, since we didn't get any for modern this time around, there is another video that I posted last week going over some of the cards that I thought could potentially be unbanned in this BNR, and maybe we could see them in the next one. Who knows? But yeah, that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel, leave a like on the video, ring the notification bell so you know when videos get posted. Posting modern and pioneer content almost daily, so if you want to catch all that, please subscribe to the channel. And of course, ring the notification bell so you are notified. And I'll link the article in the description. I have the link to the Discord server in the description as well if you want to follow that and join over there as well. That's going to do it for me. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all in the next one.